This kid was missing for 4 years before police actually found out what was happening. This is Sean Horbeck on October 6, 2002. He left his bike outside just like any 11-year-old would. But what he didn't know was a white truck was following him from behind. The man inside this truck would show Sean pure torture. Michael Devlin was patrolling open roads for young victims when he finally found someone he could capture, Sean Horbeck. As Sean was riding his bike, Devlin hit him with his truck and knocked him off, and took him in his car. He put him in the van and took him to his apartment, where he tied Sean up. Then Devlin decided to do the worst thing possible. He tried to strangle Sean Horbeck to death. When he was being strangled, Sean pleaded for his life and told him that he'd do anything he wanted. Surprisingly, Devlin agreed. And then things started to get weird. For the next 4 years, no one knew where Sean Horbeck went. That's because Michael Devlin had a huge secret. He was able to find a way to hide Sean, and nobody thought anything of it. Until one day someone saw something. Like and follow for part 2. This kid was missing for over 4 years before the police decided to do something. Part 2. If you haven't seen part 1, go watch my latest video. This is Sean Horbeck, 11-year-old who was kidnapped by Michael Devlin. And for the next 4 years, Devlin would show Sean pure torture. It came to the point where Devlin almost strangled Sean to death. Sean pleaded for his life, but Devlin let him go. In exchange, Sean said he would do anything Devlin asked for. So Devlin made Sean privately engage in horrific acts. And the way Devlin disguised himself is insane. To the outside world, it seemed like Devlin was Sean's dad. They would even ride around the car together in the town. Devlin even taught Sean how to drive. But when they weren't in public, Devlin would torture Sean. Sean was even allowed to go biking outside. But never once did he complain to the police or escape. This is because Devlin was blackmailing him. Devlin said if he ever left, he would release videos of Sean. Devlin then made a mistake and kidnapped another kid. Like and follow for part 3. This kid was missing for 4 years before people realized something was going on. Part 3. If you haven't seen part 1 or 2, go watch them right now. When Sean was 11 years old, he was captured by a man named Michael Devlin. Michael Devlin held him captured for 4 years and tortured him every day. He even forced him to do horrific acts and recorded them. And for months, police were looking for Sean, but they had no idea where he was. To the outside world, Devlin was a father figure to Sean. He even taught him how to drive. He went all over with him. But in private, it was different. When they were alone, Devlin would torture Sean. But Devlin wasn't satisfied, so he kidnapped another kid named Ben. Ben was crying in the car, so people reported Devlin to the police. The police then came into Devlin's home to investigate what Devlin was actually up to. Devlin was too scared, so he confessed to the police. And while the police were looking for Ben, they actually found Sean as well. Both Sean and Ben both went back to their families. Devlin was sentenced to prison. But something even worse happened to Devlin in prison. If you want to know what happened to Devlin in prison, make sure you follow my Instagram for part 4. Thanks for watching.
Curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 24. There's been multiple cases of people actually being eaten alive by an escalator. If you like to eat cereal, there's a 21 to 38% chance that you're also eating an scariest mite. Supposedly, if you have sanpaku eyes, meaning that there's white below your iris, it actually means that you're supposed to die young. Every time you feel very aggressive, your brain is set to kill for a few seconds. So in that 1 second, you could kill a human being. When getting laser eye surgery, you can actually smell the parts of your eyes being shaved down by the lasers. If you're a male, after you die, your loved ones can have a doctor electrocute your prostate, forcing you to ejaculate for your sperm. Female dragonflies often fake their own death to prevent rape. If you ever get burned by electricity, it will leave burn marks shaped like lightning on your skin. Many pets actually die because their owner dies unexpectedly and nobody comes in to check in on them in time.
Have you ever wondered how accurate police sketches are? I'm going to show you a police sketch from the Alec Murdaugh case and we're going to see. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This is a sketch of the man that Alec Murdaugh claims shot him on September 4th, 2021. And for those that don't know, Alec Murdaugh is on trial right now for the summer 2021 slaying of his wife and son. Alec claimed that he wasn't home at the time that his wife and child were murdered, but a Snapchat taken by his son just 5 minutes before his death proved that Alec was at the scene of the crime. And just a few months after the murders, Alec said that he had pulled his car over on the side of the road when this man pulled up and shot him. But this man doesn't exist. Alec completely fabricated the description of the man for police. Alec was actually shot, but what happened was he hired this man to do it. And the reasoning behind it is wild. Alec claimed that he couldn't handle the loss of his wife and son, so he hired this man to take his life. And that way too, if he lost his life, his other son would get the $10 million life insurance policy on him. But Alec had been writing that man checks for small amounts for the months leading up to the event. That man was a handyman on the Murdaugh property, but what Alec was trying to do, it's believed, was make him look like he was Alec's drug dealer. And that way, if he shot Alec, it would also look like that was the man that shot his wife and son. So we'll never know how accurate the police sketch is because this man is not real. But if you're following the case, what do you think?
This teen and her boyfriend murdered her father because he didn't approve of their relationship. 16-year-old Sierra Halseth and 18-year-old Aaron Guerrero started dating in June 2020 to December 2020 until Sierra's father found out that the two wanted to run away to LA, so he told Sierra to stop seeing Aaron. Obviously, Sierra and Aaron were not too happy about this, and on April 2021, the couple decided to murder Sierra's father, Daniel Halseth. On this day, Sierra and Aaron stabbed Daniel 70 times and then left his body in his garage to burn. They then stole Daniel's car and withdrew hundreds of dollars from his bank account. They tried to run away together, but then were caught by authorities 4 days later at a train station in Salt Lake City. And what's chilling is the video evidence that police found on Sierra's phone of both of them laughing about murdering Sierra's father.
Welcome back to our YouTube channel. After murdering, day 3 after murdering somebody. Wow! Don't put that on the camera!
The teens claim that Sierra's father mistreated her and that's why they did what they did. But her family says that that's a lie and that she did this because she wanted to be with Aaron and her father didn't let her. But eventually they pleaded guilty and were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 22 years.
You heard about this foreign streaming service that people are claiming is like the darkest? I don't know about you, but the scariest TV shows and movies are almost always foreign. And I recently found this Nordic streaming service that was not available in the US. But now it is, and it has some true crime stories that have been like keeping me up at night. Like the story of Lisa Holm, who was a teenager in Sweden working at a cafe when she never made it home one night. She had just texted her father that she was heading home on her moped, but when she never showed up that night, he actually drove to her work and found that her moped was still in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition. And no one inside had seen what happened to her between the entrance to the cafe and her moped. And then when the police are called, they start finding some of her belongings, leading them like breadcrumbs to this shed up here. And that's where they ultimately find Lisa's body crammed into a locker. And this is the crazy part, but beforehand, there was a guy in the search party looking for Lisa who was telling volunteers beforehand to not look in this specific shed. So the police think that there's something weird with this guy, so they bring him in for questioning, and during the investigation, they find thousands of images and videos on his computer of like extreme violence against women. His name was Nergis Belavicius, and he was eventually convicted of Lisa's murder. And this was actually an episode in Crime Scene Sweden, which is a show about murders that just wrecked the country. There's tons of other shows I haven't heard of that I'm actually really digging, so I'm gonna include a link in my bio for you to check it out and let me know what you watch.
Blood-curdling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 24. Serial killer Joe Matheny sold burgers at his food stand made up of animal meat and the flesh of his victims. Look, I know what you're thinking, and no, this is not a flamingo bludgeoning its head into another while its baby feeds on the blood. Instead of the typical white milk, Caribbean flamingos have red milk, and both parents feed their young with it. There are more Panda Expresses in the world than actual pandas. 14 years before the Titanic sank, there was a book released that highlighted the story of an unsinkable ship that hit an iceberg. In the story, there was a shortage of lifeboats, and the ship was called Titan. There was a tiger in India known as the Champawat tiger that killed 436 people. Researchers once turned a cat into a telephone, a living cat, and the cat actually survived the experiment. That is, until they killed it to see if the same experiment would work with a dead cat. It didn't. Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, and American Horror Story all have characters based on serial killer Ed Gein, who was so heartbroken by the death of his mother that he began to make a woman suit, so he could become her and literally crawl inside of her skin.
This is Leatherface. His story is rather disturbing, so here's your content warning. He's an incredibly violent and merciless serial killer who has a penchant for killing his victims with a chainsaw. His full name changes depending on the source, but he goes by Bubba Sawyer, Jed Sawyer, and Thomas Brown Hewitt. He gained the moniker of Leatherface because he has 3 homemade masks made out of human skin, which he wears daily. Due to his mental instability, it is said that Leatherface chooses a different mask depending on who he wants to be that day. He has a killing mask, an old lady mask, and a pretty woman mask. Leatherface was partly responsible for the 1974 murders of Franklin Hardesty and his friends Jerry, Kirk, and Pam in Texas. The killings were dubbed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I say partly responsible because he had help from his family. Leatherface lived in a farmhouse with his brothers Drayton and Nubbins, as well as their grandpa. The only survivor of the massacre was Sally Hardesty, Franklin's sister. After being tied up, Sally managed to escape and then jumped out of a window. Nubbins and Leatherface gave chase, but the former was hit and killed by a passing truck. The truck driver fled the scene as he saw Leatherface in pursuit wielding his trusty chainsaw. Sally managed to escape in a passing pickup truck, leaving Leatherface swinging his beloved chainsaw in frustration in the middle of the road. There is more to this story. If you would like to hear more, leave me a comment and we'll see about a part 2.
This woman seemingly vanished into thin air until forensics proved exactly what happened. Candice Shields was a 20-year-old woman from Texas. She was last seen at her grandparents' home in Graham on the night of December the 10th, 2011. Strangely, the morning after, all her belongings were still at the house, but she herself had vanished. Worryingly, she'd been due to start a new job that morning and never showed up. Days passed and no one heard from her, which was very concerning considering she has a 1-year-old son and was pregnant. Her family decided to report her missing on December the 15th. Police spoke to Candice's boyfriend and the father of her unborn child, Jeremy Thornburg. The pair had actually had an on-off relationship and Jeremy would accuse Candice of being with other men. Meanwhile, he was seeing another woman called LaJuana Long. She was actually very jealous of Candice and police learned that she'd threatened her in the past. Now, the case seemed to slow down quite a lot until February 2013. LaJuana and Jeremy were finally arrested. They were actually charged with murder despite police not having Candice's body. Now, phone records showed that the trio were actually in close proximity at the time that Candice vanished. Then there was a forensic breakthrough. Blood on one of Jeremy's guns that police had seized matched Candice's DNA. LaJuana pleaded guilty and was given 30 years for the murder of Candice. She actually testified in court that Jeremy lured Candice to a field and shot her, and the pair covered bleach over her body to try and cover up evidence. Although Candice's body has still not been found, Jeremy was also found guilty of murder and given life in prison.
This case has really shocked me, not just because of the horrific injuries that this beautiful baby sustained, but also because of the ridiculously short sentence that her parents received. Ava Mae Collard was just 5 months old when she was squeezed so tightly that she stopped breathing and suffered a cardiac arrest.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing? Is the patient breathing?
She later died in hospital, and as she was laid fighting for her life, her father went home to get rid of the drugs that he'd been growing at their home in Stafford. Little Ava Mae was exposed to cannabis multiple times during her short life and suffered extensive injuries in the 5 months that she was alive. Her parents, Joshua Collard and Rebecca Grocott, were arrested on March 25, 2020, and both said they had absolutely no idea how Ava Mae's injuries were sustained. At the time of her death, Ava had 28 rib fractures, as well as a fractured collarbone and femur. She also had trauma to the side of her head, which had caused an ear injury, and she had bruises on her scalp, face and legs. The court heard that Josh was an ill-tempered misogynist, and he showed absolutely no remorse for what had happened to his daughter. Ava Mae was actually known to social services, and both them and her mother Rebecca did absolutely nothing to stop in and protect her. In 2020, Rebecca received 8 years in prison and Joshua received 11 years in prison. If, like me, you don't think these sentences are anywhere near long enough for the death of Ava Mae, you'll be shocked to hear that they only have to serve half of those sentences before they can apply for parole, meaning Rebecca might be out in just over a year and Joshua might be out in just over 2.5 years.
Family apparently saw aliens in their backyard in Las Vegas. On April 30th at 11:50 p.m., this was caught by a police officer's body camera. Many other people in Utah, Nevada, and California saw the same thing in the sky on that same night. And then on May 1st at 12 a.m., only 10 minutes after people saw the light in the sky, police received a phone call from this 16-year-old named Angel. He says that he was in his backyard when he heard a very loud bang and the ground shook. He He said that all of a sudden everything in front of him became blurry and he started to hear footsteps around him, and then a few seconds later the blurriness was gone. He then described seeing two 10 feet long non-human creatures in front of him with big eyes and big mouths. At first he thought he was having paralysis because when he locked eyes with these creatures he couldn't move, but then when he was able to move again he ran inside and called for his father. His dad and brother also saw the creatures, and when police arrived they admitted that they saw something in the sky, and that's the only reason why they came to the house. These are some photos of where the UFO landed. You see some perfect circles right there, and there's also some footage of afterwards where the family was checking out if there was anything there. There appears to be something here. I know a lot of people are skeptical about this, but the family is clearly freaked out to the point where they apparently moved out of the house. But you know what I've been noticing lately is how much attention the news is giving UFO sightings compared to before. People have been recording and witnessing these sightings for decades now. So why all of a sudden are we now talking about this on the news? Are they trying to tell us something, distract us from something, or prepare us for something? What do you guys think?
This is the tragic story of the young girl that inspired the Amber Alert system in the US. Amber Hagerman was just 9 years old when she was brutally murdered in her hometown of Arlington, Texas. Born on November 25th, 1986 to parents Donna and Richard, Amber was their first child, closely followed by younger brother Ricky. On January 13th, 1996, the family's world was turned upside down when Amber was abducted in broad daylight. Amber and Ricky had been out riding their bikes like they did most days. Ricky decided he wanted to go home, but Amber wanted to stay out a bit longer, and she headed over to an abandoned car park. It was around 3:10 in the afternoon when a passerby named Jimmy Kevill heard a scream from the car park. He looked over to see Amber being picked up off her bike and thrown into a black pickup truck. 78-year-old Jimmy was a former sheriff's deputy, and he immediately called the police. A search quickly began, and 4 days went by with no sign of the pickup truck, the suspect, or Amber. And then on January 17th, in this creek, a body was found. It was Amber's, and she had some horrific injuries. Amber was laid face down, completely naked, and when she was rolled over, her horrific injuries were revealed. Her throat had been completely ripped out with the use of a sharp object, such as a screwdriver. A team of detectives formed a new task force specifically for Amber's case, and they followed up on around 5,000 leads. But shockingly, still to this day, Amber's killer has never been found. As Amber's family mourned her death, a Texas mother came up with a brilliant idea to honour Amber's memory and protect other children around the US. She called a local radio station and told them about her idea to create a national alert system for missing children, and with that, the Amber Alert was born. There are currently 82 Amber Alert plans throughout the United States, and as of January 2023, 1,127 children have been recovered thanks to Amber Alerts.
When this woman vanished, people feared the worst. What actually happened was so much more sinister than anyone imagined. 27-year-old Linda Spence was a financial advisor from Glasgow. In May 2011, she was reported missing by her parents. They'd become worried because they hadn't heard from her in a while. When news eventually hit of what had actually happened to her, it stunned the nation. Linda's family initially did an emotional appeal on TV for anybody who knew anything or had seen Linda to come forward. Her distraught mum strangely got a text off Linda's phone. It stated, "Love you, mum," but Linda's mum noticed that usually she puts LUVU, and this said LOVEYOU. Bit of a background about Linda: she was known by her friends to be very wealthy. She actually convinced her acquaintances that she was successful in finance, but this couldn't have been further from the truth. Things got so bad at one point that she was declared bankrupt. However, she then inherited quite a lot of money off her deceased nan, so she was able to keep up appearances. She began doing some dodgy investment deals, and at the time of her disappearance, she was allegedly involved in a multi-million-pound land deal near Stansted Airport. She was taking large amounts of money from various investors with the promise of getting a big return. The reality was that this was a lie. Some big investors involved were John Glenn and Colin Coates. When John started to get frustrated at the lack of money back from Linda, Linda blamed a man called Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben was actually fictitious. John started sending threatening text messages to this Uncle Ben, not realising that the phone was actually controlled by Linda. Linda had numerous different aliases and 20 different phones. 7 weeks after Linda vanished, one of her phones was actually found in a bin in Kilburnie. The phone revealed that a contact of Linda's actually lived nearby. This man was Philip Wade. He was involved in criminality and knew Colin Coates. Police at this point knew that a week after vanishing, Linda's car was spotted on number plate recognition software on the motorway. They were also able to identify that a man's phone pinged the phone mast the exact same time that Linda's car was picked up on cameras at that exact location. The phone belonged to Colin Coates. Now, Colin and Philip were acquaintances of two men, David Parker and Paul Smith. When David and Paul were questioned, they admitted to having assisted in kidnapping Linda. It transpired that she'd been snatched off the street in Broomhill in Glasgow in April 2011. She was driven to Ayrshire and the two men were paid £10,000 to babysit her. They were apparently too scared of Colin to set her free. David Parker admitted that she was held at his home for nearly 2 weeks. During this time, she was tortured. She was tied to a chair and they used an iron, a golf club, cigarettes and bolt cutters. Police would go on to find forensic proof that Linda's blood was in the flat. Colin is believed to have suffocated Linda before putting her body in the boot of her car. Tragically for her family, Linda's body has still never been found. David and Paul were given 11-year sentences. Colin got 33 years behind bars. Philip was given 30 years. This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words Katie's Revenge across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin. This killer accidentally admitted to his crimes by accident when he forgot he was wearing a microphone while taking part in a documentary. This is how a true crime documentary exposed a killer. In 1971, Robert Durst met Kathleen McCormack and they got married. At the time of her disappearance in 1982, Kathleen had nearly graduated college. She was last seen by a witness at a dinner party where she appeared to be upset. She got a call from Robert and left. Robert admitted to having argued with Kathleen that night, but he said he put her on a train to New York and then never saw her again. Her friend called police to report her missing. Interestingly, Kathleen had been treated at a medical centre for facial bruises weeks prior to this and told the friend that Robert had done it. Robert had actually been dating someone else for some time prior to this and had been living separately to Kathleen. When her family broke into her cottage to try and find out where she was, they found the place had been trashed and her possessions put in the bin. Kathleen's family always believed that Robert was involved in her disappearance. In 2000, Susan Berman, a friend of Robert's, was found murdered. Now, she'd actually provided Robert with an alibi for Kathleen's disappearance. Now, pay really close attention to this next bit. Days after she was killed, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department contained Susan's address and the word cadaver on it. On the envelope, Beverly was misspelled. Robert admitted in 2005 that Susan had called him shortly before her death to say that the police wanted to question her about Kathleen going missing. It's believed that Robert killed Susan to keep her quiet. In 2001, Robert's neighbour's body parts were found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert's elderly neighbour, Morris Black, had been killed and Robert was arrested. He was actually released on bail and fled and was found about a month later in Pennsylvania. He was found with $37,000 cash, 2 weapons, and interestingly, Morris Black's driving licence. In court, Robert claimed he was acting in self-defence. He said he'd accidentally shot Morris and dismembered his body. Due to lack of forensics, he only got 5 years in jail. This is where things get really crazy. HBO was filming a documentary called The Jinx. During production, Susan's stepson found a letter written by Robert. This contained the same spelling error in the word Beverly as the anonymous letter to police. This implicated Robert in the murder. Now, while filming the documentary, Robert needed the toilet. He forgot that he had a microphone still attached to him. He was recorded talking to himself. He said, "There it is, you're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. Arrest him." And then he said, "What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong." And finally he said, "I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course."
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
Family of this missing girl found out via the media that she'd been murdered, butchered, and sold as kebab meat. This case will put you off ever eating a kebab again. Charlene Downs disappeared aged just 14 years old in November 2003. She was living in Blackpool, UK, and was last seen in an area containing many kebab shops and takeaways. While out with her friends one night, Charlene bumped into her mum. Her mum said that Charlene needed to be home by 10 PM that night, which was quite typical for Charlene. Tragically, this would be the last time that her mum would ever see Charlene alive. When Charlene didn't turn up by 10 PM, her dad went out on his bike looking for her for around half an hour. When he couldn't find her, he just presumed that she'd stayed over at her friend's house and went home and went to sleep. When she still didn't arrive the next morning, her parents started to get worried and they called police. Police, however, said that they could not report this as a missing person until she'd been missing for 48 hours. Eventually, police did start to look for her, but they said that they presumed she was a runaway. The case went cold until 3 years later. Charlene's family were called into a police station. There was news of 2 men who had been arrested, linked with a local takeaway called Funny Boys. They were arrested on suspicion of murder and disposal of Charlene. This is when the family found out some shocking news via the media about what had happened to Charlene. An article published stated that she had been grinded up and sold as kebab meat. One of the brothers of the men who had been arrested had heard them bragging about doing this. Now, Charlene's disappearance actually unearthed the fact that these takeaways were being used as a front for P rings, where men were luring teenagers in with food and alcohol in exchange for things I cannot repeat on this app. When the case against these 2 men went to trial, the jury failed to reach a verdict. The case was then thrown out of court due to apparent lack of physical evidence. One of the reasons for this is how well Charlene's body had obviously been disposed of. Both men who had been charged were given £250,000 compensation for being falsely trialled. Around a week after the trial, Charlene's mum was actually arrested for stabbing her husband. He declined to press charges, saying that he knew she had been stressed. Members of the family were also charged with racially aggravated assault against the brother of the man who'd been charged with murder, and also punching the man who'd been charged with helping dispose of her body. In August 2017, police arrested a 51-year-old man who lived in Blackpool at the time of Charlene's disappearance. This was on suspicion of murdering her, however, he was released just 2 days later. We still have no justice for Charlene and nobody is behind bars for her killing.